Welcome to Chapter 17 of Traditions and Encounters, the Foundations of Christian Society in Western Europe. So, Western Europe in this time period of world history. So, the first thing is the quest for political order. So, there were Germanic successor states to the Western Roman Empire, as we saw in a few videos before, that Western Rome had fallen, and only Eastern Rome, the Byzantine Empire, was left. So, who filled the void in the West then? There were these German successor states, and there were Germanic kingdoms. So they were sort of all originating around the German of modern-day Germany. And basically, these Germanic kingdoms were Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, Burgundians, and Anglo-Saxons. And basically, there were a lot of these groups, but some important ones to remember are the Visigoths, who were from Spain, and the Anglo-Saxons, who were from like France and of course, later England. So the Franks were sort of these big people in France, and they were sort of like the center of gravity, but they were also shifting, and they shifted to Italy, to the northern lands, and eventually they came to be the new sort of Roman Empire in the West. So the Franks first. So the Franks, there was this really important person named Clovis, and he led the Franks and wiped out the last vestiges of the Roman authority in Gaul. So Western Rome basically gone after the Franks and Clovis. Now Clovis converted to Christianity, so even though he absorbed the Romans, he also took their religion as well. So when he converted, many Germanic peoples converted to Christianity as well, and the Franks themselves later converted to Roman Christianity. And their alliance with the Roman Church greatly strengthened the Franks because it sort of provided like a culture for them to be a part of. Then there were the Carolingians, and these were an aristocratic clan, and it was founded by Charles Martel. And Charles Martel's grandson was the great Charlemagne. And Charlemagne basically helped control and expand the empire to northeast Spain, Bavaria, and even North Italy. And we'll see his importance later on. So the leaders in these areas used Missi Dominici, which was basically this system where officials were commissioned by the Frankish king or the Holy Roman Emperor, as we'll see later, to supervise the administration or justice in parts of their empire. So sort of subdividing. So after Charlemagne as emperor, there was Pope Leo III. So even though the Western Empire was dead of Rome, there was still the Roman Catholic Church that was still going strong. And of course, they still had their popes, which was like the grand leader of them all. And Pope Leo III proclaimed Charlemagne the Holy Roman Emperor in 800. And this was really important because it sort of combined the political aspect of the Franks with the religious aspect of the Roman Catholics, and together they could do a lot stronger things in the future. So this coronation of Charlemagne really strained relations with the Byzantine emperors out east because, of course, they didn't really like this because it was decreasing power for the east if the west got stronger with Charlemagne and his kingdoms. So ultimately, though, the Carolingian Empire declined as well and dissolved eventually, and then there was only Louis the Pious, and he was Charlemagne's only surviving son, but he lost control of the counts as well. So with him gone, his three remaining sons sort of couldn't maintain the power, and so they divided the empire into three kingdoms by 843. Also, there were invasions that severely contributed to the divisions and falls, so Muslims raided the south, so like Sicily and parts of France. There were also outside invaders from the east, and of course the Vikings, those Norsemen, came in from the north, and we really start to see them take a big stance in Western Europe at this time as well. Also, Norse expansion, so the Vikings, they had their Scandinavian homelands, which were like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and they had motives to expand, so there were booming populations in their areas, and also they didn't really like the Christian missionaries who were trying to sort of go in and take over. Also, most were merchants and migrants, so they were moving anyways, and they mounted many raids all across Europe, so Russia, Spain, all across Western Europe, and most importantly though, they were outstanding seafarers, so they even established a colony in Canada about 1000, so like Columbus crossed the ocean by 1492, so this was way before Columbus. Some historians even think that the Vikings were the first people to land in North America and the Americas in general. Also, fleets could go to interior regions via rivers, so their longboats were really sort of agile, and they could like go to so many different places like towns and villages on rivers to attack. Also, in this time, we see the establishment of small regional authorities, so England starts to grow at this time. Also, Germany, there was one important king, King Otto I. He defeated some outsiders and imposed authority in Germany, so we see the rise of Germany sort of in this time, although it's not exactly modern day Germany yet. Also, he got coronated too by the Pope in 962, and he became the new Holy Roman Emperor, so this really helped his cause as well. So, early medieval society was really based on the system of feudalism, basically organizing a decentralized state. So, as the Carolingian Empire dissolved, local nobles decided to build their own decentralized states because there was no central power to control them. There were these systems of lords and retainers, so the lord basically provided the retainer with a grant known as a benefice, so like land, and usually the retainer would then farm for the lord. And this allowed the retainer to devote time and energy to serve the lord, sort of like a peasant and owner relationship. So this was basically feudalism at the time. Also, this helped because, of course, they were able to provide resources to maintain horses and military equipment, so it's sort of good for both parties. Also, for the lord, there was like loyalty, obedience, respect, council, military service if they ever needed to, fight outsiders. And this relationship became really strong, and eventually it even became hereditary, being passed down through generations and lines. So, instability though. This was a multi-tier network of lord-retainer relationships, and sometimes it was like easy to fall and crash. So it's kind of not very stable, but it was important nonetheless to build these strong emperors. Also, there were this system of serfs and manors. So serfs were like kind of like slaves, but they were technically free, but they really didn't really act like free. Basically, slaves and peasants alike, they took agricultural tasks because they were sort of at the lowest rung of the social hierarchy at the time, and they frequently intermarried. And these free peasants often turned themselves and their lands over to a lord for protection because, in this decentralized state, no one is safe. Also, serfs became an intermediate category around the mid-7th century, so once again, they weren't really lords, but they definitely really weren't slaves either. So they're sort of just slotted in the middle. So obligations, they had to do labor service, rents. Also, they couldn't move to other lands without permission, so that's kind of like the slavery aspect right there. But once their obligations were fulfilled, they could work on different land and pass it to their heirs. So they're sort of like the lord's aspect of it. Also, there were manors, which were a principal form of agricultural organization. Basically, it was a large estate, and they were largely self-sufficient communities, and they were really important at this time. So economy, of course, there were too many invasions in these decentralized states, so agriculture wasn't always stable, but they did have heavy plows, which really helped to till the northern soils and increase productivity. Also, water mills help rotate crops as well. All of these really help their agricultural stuff and technique. Also, mostly rural society, so there weren't enough food productions to support the large cities. Mediterranean trade, Italians and Spanish, of course, traded with the Muslims who were powerful at this time. And of course, as mentioned earlier, the Norse merchant mariners, so they followed the routes of Viking conquerors, and they really traded actively with the people in power. So the biggest takeaway, though, is definitely the formation of Christian Europe. So the politics of conversion, as we said earlier, it was both political and social. So the Franks and the church, the Frankish rulers viewed themselves as protectors of the papacy, so that's the Holy Roman Empire that they were sort of trying to maintain, basically the Roman Catholic Church. And the spread of Christianity, so Charlemagne's military campaigns forced the Saxons to accept Christianity, whether they really wanted it or not. But of course, pagan ways did not disappear immediately because it's hard to change a whole generation, but ultimately syncretism helped them adopt as well. And the biggest thing is by 1000 CE, all Western Europe had adopted Roman Christianity, and as we'll see later with like colonization and stuff, this is why Christianity is so dominant today. Also, the papacy, there was this important Pope Gregory I, and as Pope, he organized a defense of Rome against Lombard's menace, so Lombard was like trying to take over the Catholic Church and stuff. And he also sort of made the church stronger itself, so he reasserted papal primacy over the bishops who were like lower leaders of the Catholic Church. Also, he strongly emphasized penance, which is confession and atonement for sins, which was sort of dying out at the time because, people, they don't always want to do that. Also, monasticism, basically, there were these devout Christians and they practiced asceticism. And these people basically, they really started to expand when Christianity became legal in the 4th century, of course, as we saw with like the Edict of Milan earlier and stuff. Also, monastic rules, there was this Saint Benedict who provided a set of regulations for these monasteries. And people, basically these monks, they live through sort of like poverty, so they weren't really lavish. Chastity, so no pleasures. And definitely obedience, so they were obedient to people, but most importantly obedient to God. And these monasteries, they became sort of like the dominant feature in the social and cultural life of Western Europe, so sort of like, the Buddhist monasteries over in Asia. Also, they had large land holdings, and much of the rural labor force was for the agricultural production of the monasteries, and they provided a variety of social services, so like inns, shelters, orphanages, hospitals, schools, a lot of things. And libraries even recorded some of this stuff. So this is actually really close to the monasteries started by the Buddhists in East Asia. So this is definitely something you can compare. So in conclusion, this has been the Chapter 17, The Foundations of Christian Society in Western Europe, basically showing how Christianity really started to expand through syncretism and the establishment of new empires throughout Western Europe. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.